Now, if you study classic Greek mythology, you run into the Titans. These creatures in the legends and the myths were partly terrestrial and partly celestial. They rebelled against their father Uranus, and after a prolonged contest were defeated by Zeus and condemned where? Into Tartarus. Do you see a parallel brewing here? I'm going to suggest to you that the legends of the ancient Greeks embody the truth of what really happened in the past, that there were these strange creatures generating hybrids that the Greek called Titans. And we see Zeus in many forms. We see Atlas and Hercules. Atlas and Hercules from Greek mythology were what would be called in the Hebrew Nephilim, offspring of an intermarriage between a god and a woman. And so now these legends we obviously see in the Sumer culture, in Assyria, in Egypt. I'll show you a few things. In the Incas, the Mayan, the Epic of Gilgamesh, in the Persian mythology, and certainly in the Greek mythology, which most of us as products of Western civilization are familiar with. Also in India, Bolivia, South Sea Islands. Every one of these cultures, and the American Indians, every one of these cultures have legends of the star people. These people that came, these gods or demigods, whatever, came and cohabited with women and produced hybrids. I discover from some apparent experts in the American Indian culture that this business of holding a hand up saying how, that's Hollywood. But what apparently was the practice when they met a stranger was to hold up the hand so they could count fingers. They had a terror of the six-fingered people. And if you go to the ruins at Chaca, New Mexico, they have one of the exhibits there that you want to take a look at, with famous pictographs. And among those pictographs, you'll find the fearsome six-fingered hand as part of that. I came across something else that's kind of, the Pawnee Indians have an account that you remember Buffalo Bill? Real name was William Cody. He wrote his autobiography in 1920. Very colorful guy. You can get his book. It's popular. But there's an interesting quote in his book by Buffalo Bill Cody, published in 1920. He says, while we were in the Sandhills scouting the Niobrara country, the Pawnee Indians brought into camp some very large bones, one of which the surgeon of the expedition pronounced to be the thigh bone of a human being. The Indians said the bones were those of a race of people who long ago had lived in that country. They said these people were 3 times the size of a man of the present day, and they were so swift and strong that they could run by the side of a buffalo and, taking the animal in one arm, could tear off a leg and eat it as they ran. I don't know what to make of that. It's in his autobiography. It's published in 1920. I don't think he was worried about UFOs and stuff, but it is a interesting allusion to the Indian legends. In the early country, Ashur, they always speak of the flying god of Ashur. And this diagram you see in many, many of the ancient monuments of a man with a bow, like Nimrod perhaps, and the wings. And you see this on the monuments. Here's an example of them. As you go through Egypt, this is a snapshot in one of the tombs of, I think it's Ramesses II, but you see in all of them. You'll notice on the headers of these passages, again you see a flying disc again and again and again as you go through Egypt. You look at the headers on many of these monuments. You look up there and you always see the flying disc, sometimes with a snake involved. And you see it again and again and again. Sometimes you see a person involved with these, and you even find the disc being transported from place to place. So this seems to be something more than simply a symbol of some icon that they're worshiping. Well, you say, gee, Chuck, this angel view is kind of strange. I hadn't heard of that before. You know, when our book was published, I got telephone calls from top executives of some of the Christian publishers that were angry, not at me, at their seminary background, because many of them are graduates of seminaries, and they were never taught the angel view. And that's disturbing. You may not agree with it, but it still should be taught as one of the alternative views. What most people have taught, you'll find it in many Bible handbook stuff, the so-called lines of Seth view. The idea that we're the sons of God really refers to the line of Seth, the leadership of the line of Seth. And the daughters of Adam really means the daughters of Cain, not Seth. And the sin that is dominant there is their failure to maintain separation, is the concept. Now, it doesn't explain how the offspring of these unions resulted in these strange creatures. If you have a believer and unbeliever marry, they may have monsters, but they're not monstrous. Okay. This whole view of the so-called lines of Seth emerged in the 5th century in the early church. Celsus and Julian the Apostate used the traditional belief. See, this belief that I've shown you was taught by the ancient rabbis in the Old Testament period and also taught by the early church up through the 5th century. But Celsus and Julian the Apostate used the traditional belief to attack Christianity. They made fun of these people who thought angels and so forth. They attacked it. Julius Africanus resorted to this Sethite idea as a more comfortable ground. People find that less spooky. And Cyril of Alexandria used it to repudiate the Orthodox position. Augustine comes along, who was a profound influence, and he did many, many great things. He dealt with a number of heresies, but he embraced the Sethite series, and that, of course, made it orthodox. And so this view of this line of Seth prevailed all through the medieval church. It isn't until you go back to the text and do your homework that you begin to realize that the line of Seth has absolutely no scriptural support. The text itself, the sons of God, is never used of believers in the Old Testament. That's contrived. Seth was not God. Cain was not Adam. The sons of God are not the sons of Seth. And the daughters of Adam were not just the daughters of Cain. They're both. That if you recognize the first 2 verses are one sentence, a lot of that becomes very obvious. And if there's daughters of men, where are the daughters of Elohim? If there's sons of Elohim, where's the daughters of Elohim? See, you sort of wonder, what there's no mention of that. The grammatical antithesis is ignored, and I won't get to that here. But this idea of maintaining separation doesn't occur until chapter 11 of Genesis, not 6. It's 5 chapters later that we have the Babel and all of that. The separation is imposed upon Isaac and his following, not on Ishmael or the others. It was Isaac and Jacob that were told to keep themselves separate. And that was not imposed on Seth and Cain. That's all contrived. In fact, Genesis 6 verse 12 says, all flesh was corrupted. So the idea that lines of Seth were the good guys and the line of Cain was the bad guys is contrived. That's not what it's all about. See, the inferred godliness of Seth is contrived. Why was only Enoch and Noah's 8 spared? Were they only good guys? No, it's God's grace, of course. They took wives that they chose. Implies some forcing functions here. And if that's all, if Seth were such good guys, why did they perish in the flood? Doesn't compute. And Enosh, it was incidentally Enosh's, Seth's son, that initiated the defiance of God. Most people don't realize that because of mistranslation. Genesis 4:26 should read, then men began to profane, not call upon, profane the name of the Lord. So renders the Targum of Onkelos, the Targum of Jonathan, the major Hebrew rabbis, Rashi, Maimonides, and the rest, and of course Jerome. So the daughters of Cain, this is not a subset of the daughters of Adam. There's no basis for that. And the Cainites were not necessarily godless. I've always wondered in Genesis 4 why we have the genealogy of Cain. Because they're going to all perish in the flood. Why does the Scripture give us the genealogy? Well, there may be other reasons, but one reason is if you read the names, you'll find the name of God in them. You get the impression that Cain messed up, killed his brother, yes, but he raised his kids and grandchildren to worship God. He was a godly guy, and the names reveal that. So the idea that the descendants of Cain were bad guys is a contrivance of modern scholarship. And why are they just daughters of Cain? Were the daughters of Seth so unattractive? What's the deal here? So that's, of course. And of course, the death knell to this theory is that the unnatural offspring. What were the Nephilim then? See, they were supernatural offspring, the mighty men, the Gebarim. Does that mean only X chromosomes among the Sethites? There are no women of renown recorded. And what really made Noah's genealogy so distinctive? It wasn't contaminated by these goings on. And as I pointed out, we have these New Testament confirmations. We looked at several of them, and I won't get into that here. The angel view was the traditional rabbinical view in the Old Testament. The book of Enoch is just an example of their belief system, emphasizes that. The testimony of the 12 patriarchs, these are not inspired books, but they do reflect the thinking of the times. Josephus clearly understood this. The Septuagint clearly spells it out. The church fathers in the first few centuries, Philo, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and the rest of them, all taught this. Modern scholarship, Pember, DeHaan, McIntosh, Dillich, Gaebelin, Arthur Pink, Donald Barnhouse, who I respect highly, Henry Morris, Merrill Unger, Arnold Fruchtenbaum, terrific scholar, Hal Lindsey, Chuck Smith, others. Modern scholarship recognizes the angel view. The Sethite view is the text itself destroys it. The inferred separation is nonsense. The inferred godliness is contrived. The inferred Canaanite substitute of the Adamites is not contrived. All this is contrived. Yet unnatural offspring implied is the death knell to the view, in my opinion. Of course, the New Testament, Jude and 2 Peter nail it.